I joined Lovell to run Lovell on the 1st of June this year. So I'm not long into the world of homes and housing. But prior to that, I was responsible, and as Tim knows down there, I was responsible for leading what was probably the largest ever transfer of authority, certainly, and actually in some terms land from the public estate into a partnership vehicle, and that was for the Defence Infrastructure Organisation. I would have thought there'd be very few of you without significant land holding through health or from the military, with some of you MOD in your patch. And one theme for me today is to really ask you whether, in considering what the long-term potential of your land holding is, whether you do that with the health estate, the public health estate, and the public military estate, and other central government-owned estate in mind as well. And whether you have actually, rather than, I had a look at Google earlier, and I looked up county council land for sale. And I was absolutely flabbergasted by the number of very small individual sites for sale right now. Pages and pages and pages of them. So I wonder also whether you go through the process of effectively mapping those bits of public estate, including your own, that may have synergy, where you could actually get more value than through just sale of individual parcels of land. I was struck by a few things. I sat in on Ben Page's really fascinating talk from Ipsos Mori, and I was struck by a few things. One is when he said the majority of over 40s worry about owning a home. They feel that they will never own a home. He said that there's a very strong feeling that housing is a local issue, not a national issue, and for me he's signalling very strongly that we have responsibility for our own destiny, and we can't wait really for central government to tell us what to do. The infrastructure was generally felt to be subpar, and that there was general support amongst councils, county councils and councils generally, for development, and a growing support, as opposed to the kind of the NIMBY type views that we may have experienced a few years ago. And that's a recognition that we have a shortage of rental accommodation, affordable and market rent, and also of houses for sale. It's very easy, this. Just press one button. There we go. Most of you don't have this problem. You have the opposite problem, the opposite challenge, and as I mentioned earlier, the challenge really in looking at the potential of your own estate and mapping the value is about literally that. It's about mapping. These guys obviously have a very different challenge, and it's around density. I suspect most of you should, if you're not already doing so, be looking at what your own ownership, your own holding, and that of other public estate in one, with a view to possibly looking to some form of partnership, either partnership with central government, and there are some great examples out there. For example, a partnership that Granger are now involved in. They're delivering 3,850 homes in Aldershot, along with Rushmore Borough Council, and with the assistance, their ex-MOD property. So those kind of partnerships are fantastic. They're particularly fantastic in that you don't have to, as elected members or officers, you don't actually have to put a price tag on something the day that you put it up for sale. Effectively, partnership means that you develop with a private sector partner through a period of time, and ultimately the sale is the value is recalibrated on an ongoing basis. So I guess the scope for criticism for selling the family silver too cheap or whatever is reduced by the fact that you're constantly looking and reviewing it. Leadership is a massive issue. Brian mentioned it. Brian and I have discussed it before. but it's not all about courage. It's not all about being the first to do something. There are plenty of great examples out there of organisations that are effectively willing to back us up. I'm going to put all these up at the same time. Willing to back us up. So, for instance, National Infrastructure Commission are now, have now assumed housing as being part of their scope when it relates to infrastructure. So they're looking, for instance, at the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, and they're looking at putting central government money into pump priming development. So they've already formed a subgroup of the NIC to look at Oxford-Cambridge corridor, and I'm sure if you knocked on their door loudly enough, they would consider other fantastic opportunities. HCA keep announcing, in fact the Chancellor announced during the Conservative Party conference, 2 billion more of funding for accelerated development of housing. I would love to know exactly where that's going to go, and the HCA haven't been clear about it, so we will be pushing hard to find out from the HCA what they mean by that, and you should be also. There are some great models. So when I talk about leadership, you don't have to be first there. There are, Brian's mentioned a few. I've got some examples later on of great models where partnership, just a way of moving things on really, have been incredibly successful. And they haven't necessarily realised a price tag on a bit of land from day one, or they haven't nailed you to a precise target on day one. They're part of an evolving model. And I think that's important in terms of elected member risk and also officer risk. We've also got a situation where the housing associations, when they finish trying to merge and do whatever they're doing, some of them are becoming extremely proactive. We're very jealous of them because of their balance sheets, so the private sector are very jealous of them. They're jealous of us because of our capacity. There's nothing wrong with a three-way partnership, to be honest, and we're seeing some of those crop up now in the world of homes development. On the subject of risk sharing, I guess the other thing that Ben of Ipsos Mori kept harping on about was how do we quantify trust? How do we get to the point where people trust us enough to allow us to go and develop, spend their own money, commit their own assets? My view is, so I'm private sector at the moment, my view is you have something I need, I have something maybe, and I won't presume too much, that you need. I think the risk-sharing model can be quite open. There is nothing to lose in creating a partnership, as Cambridgeshire have, for example, a housing partnership that just evolves, and you see how it goes. Because at the worst case, you're committing possibly some land that you have no current use for anyway, and as you get more confident with the partnership, you throw more of your kind of key assets into the partnership. I shouldn't use the word throw, but you kind of get the gist. The other thing that Brian mentioned was skills. I think housing associations, registered providers, have fantastic skills when it comes to consultation, and that's another thing that Ben mentioned earlier. How do we, garner the trust of the people that vote for us and so on? So they have fantastic capability in that, and also in maintaining stock. The private sector should have great skills when it comes to pursuing planning consents and effectively delivering future homes. Public sector have incredible skills also, and in effectively working the way through the kind of legislative process and the process of consent and so on, and they're skills that the private sector needs. So we would be bonkers, I think, now to go forwards on large-scale development without really using elements of each one of those kind of skill sets. The next issue, I think, for us all is we're all skill-starved in some way, or resource-starved in some way. The ability to promote sites is a big issue. So the ability to cluster land holding, whether it be private sector, central government, or county council land, it takes time and it takes a lot of effort. There are private sector organisations out there, and the Slough opportunity I mentioned, the Aldershot one, where effectively private sector will lend resource for the potential of the future, so they won't charge for resource. And I think we should all be kind of using that now as a potential way of pursuing opportunity. There are also government organisations, and I've mentioned a couple, HCA and so on, who will directly commission. I'd like to see more evidence of that. But there are also others, for instance, the MOD. So the MOD are, at the moment, directly commissioning homes on the Salisbury Plain. We're building 900 for them. I would love them to have second life. I'd love to know what is going to the design of those homes that means they can become market sale properties in the future. And I think that's important as well, and we'll be trying to influence that. Experience. No one wants to be first there. No one wants to be first at the party. It would be nice to see some examples of others who've done it. So I know there are a couple of people from PA Consulting here. I learned of something while I was at PA Consulting. It's called the Voluntary Transparency Arrangement, where public sector can actually go to an organisation if they feel they have unique skills and it's a matter of national importance. There are lots of ways of getting to the start line without going through a painful European kind of procurement process. And I would ask that there is more consultation between all of us, actually, to find out what those expedient ways of getting to the start line are. There are quite a few barriers to partnership in our minds, really. Fear of the unknown. No one wants to be first to the party, as I've already said. Different objectives. There is nothing wrong with having an expectation exchange right at the beginning of a new partnership or a new relationship. You sit down and everyone is very, very honest about what they really want to get out of it. Not only that, to review that regularly is really, really important, so that you're not nailing it down on day one, but you have an evolving relationship. Control, losing control of land, losing political control. All these things are a concern. But I would just beg of you that you look at some of the more successful examples of partnership where actually control can be maintained. Golden shares in 50-50 arrangements, for instance, are possible, where you get right of veto and so on. Procurement and finance I've already mentioned. The interesting thing is I haven't mentioned money yet. So when I said there's something that you have that I need and something I have that you need, I didn't mention money purposely, because actually in the early stage of a partnership, money isn't a massive issue. Resource is a massive issue. Private sector are willing to throw that in for nothing. Land is a massive issue. You have it. Finance becomes something, again, the financial model should evolve through the course of a partnership. Confused objectives, I've kind of been there already. I just like that drawing. And I could go on and on and on, and I'm not going to. I probably said enough, actually, and I think probably the best thing now is to get to questions.
Let's get some questions. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I like the slide about the shared aims and the ships putting the fire out with the and it's about focus, isn't it? Yeah. And perhaps we all need to have a focus upon our objective, which is to see more houses built. And I'm not quite sure of, I know the why, but I'm not quite sure of what the best how is to get those houses built. I like the slide that Brian had regarding those authorities that were involved in the One Public Estate project, and I mentally looked at the county council network coverage and saw that there was vast swathes of the country that was not that was county council network coverage, but not coverage of One Public Estate, and so perhaps that's some sort of direction that we need to be looking at. Questions, colleagues? I've got 3, I've got 4, I've got 5. If we can start at the front down here, please, Victoria, then move back, No. We'll go to the lady first before the leader of Staffordshire that yesterday the Secretary of State didn't know.
Crikey, first before Philip, I don't know. Quick case study about what we did in Cheshire West and Chester, unfortunately before we lost control of the council. We cobbled together an alliance of those that could do and saw the vision of what we were trying to do. We took the advantage of upping our HRA. We put in some land. We wheedled a bit out of HCA on starter homes, and we are literally just sort of tapping out on 230 starter homes and affordable rent homes that have all been delivered whilst a major developer is also building out 600 homes for market rent. So these things can be done, and they can be done really at pace, well, by our standards, you know, but it's that determination, I think, to get things done. What I really wanted to ask was a question of Brian. He flicked quite quickly through the slides, but is there an opportunity for all of us if DWP are coming out off the back of a PFI? One of the big challenges we all have, particularly around sort of skills and worklessness, is engaging with our partners, bracket are they really, in DWP. And I'm just wondering whether there's opportunities for a bit of co-location and sort of bleeding the thought process by making them sit in our offices and work with us rather than against us.
Now be careful what you wish for. Right.
Yeah, there absolutely should be. And why am I saying should when I might have expected to be said is? The reason is that there are 48 completed co-locations. One of them we use as an example very much on our website is Nottingham City. DWP came out of a city centre building. It had value. They sold it. They got a decent capital receipt. They saved £500,000 in running costs, and they moved in with Nottingham City Council in their building right by the station. DWP, you're absolutely right, they have 800 JCPs across the country. Technically, they will be homeless by 31st of March 2018. And yet, they know they won't become homeless because DWP will have to renegotiate those leases, presumably on extremely unfavourable terms, because the buildings will then be owned by Cllr Ian, and they'll have them over a barrel. And it's an absolute scandal, I feel, that has not yet quite sort of reached the sort of public imagination on this, because by 2018 they'll have to be released. They have 25 further co-locations in the pipeline and under discussion. There is clear enthusiasm from ministers at the top, from permanent secretary and senior directors at the top, not shared, I feel, at that sort of middle management layer out in the sticks, who clearly feel I'm bashed over the head every day by one change after the next. I'm, you know, under cosh to sort of meet various standards. You know, this is just another thing I'm being asked to do. That's what I hear. So the answer to your question is yes, there absolutely should be, and I would urge where you feel you've got a building which you could make much better use of, or you could negotiate with them, or any of those things, to get on and have those discussions, because sometimes you know, it is the local managers then who do have the enthusiasm for it, do want to do it, who will progress it. But the top-down is not working in DWP at the moment, in my view.
The top-down's not working, or DWP's not working? Okay, we'll stick with the top-down. Jonathan, you just wanted to add something to that before we move on.
Not specifically relating to DWP, but the only way around that conundrum, as we discovered with the MOD, is incentive. 5-6 years ago, when the MOD, for instance, sold Chelsea Barracks, the whole lot went back to Treasury. The only way to solve the conundrum is to say, right, okay, if you either share or release land, the first call on that, on a receipt, or the first benefit will be through reprovision. So we told the MOD, you will get the first dibs on, we'll immediately give you a brand new shiny one. Second call is back to operating unit coffers, so back to the organisation, and then last of all is Treasury. And Treasury agreed to that only on the basis that that was going to promote more activity in the market. And ultimately Treasury were going to benefit, because the overall gross receipt would be greater going back to Treasury, because we'd see more activity. So I think the only way around it is some form of incentive, to be perfectly honest.
Okay. Phil?
The Philip Atkins Staffordshire County Council, we've done our asset management plan. We've got a property partner, Cllr in Pender. We're getting to do that, and we've got experience of pulling projects together with multi-landowners and getting partners in Northfield Village in Stafford, and we've got one coming up in Cheadle fairly soon. They're very complex and difficult projects to get off the ground. But following on from what you've just been talking about, there seems to be an issue to go from this strategic, and we're in One Public Estate as well, so there seems to be an issue about getting the strategy of getting these land holdings together and then moving into delivery, because the guys, we've got quite a good team on the delivery side, and they're saying we're getting bogged down with work on the strategy and getting the land assembly together, and then actually getting into delivering, because I think the conundrum which you've just talked about is outcomes, which we want more homes for retirement villages or starter homes or whatever, key workers or whatever it may be, and the drive for the money from the sale of the property. And there seems to be a conundrum about moving from strategy to delivery. And I don't know, and there's a log jam, because there is an issue about you're involved with the property partner, and then they'll come up, well, we'll give you 13 million for a piece of ground, and I said, no, I want 39. That's what the going rate is at the moment. So, there could be cherry picking. So really, for a council, it's a really quite a dangerous area.
Yeah. Come on, Jonathan, you're a deliverer. So
right, okay, there's a way around that, and it's for it to be ingrained in the partnership deal, and this might be the case with Cllr and yourselves, that actually the receipt doesn't come until the value of the kind of joined up development is realised. So for instance, if you look at our Slough model, we are 50-50 with Slough. They put in the land, we put in the development finance, and effectively we are 50-50 on the receipt, but we pay nothing. No one effectively takes anything out of the vehicle until we either rent or sell the property downstream.
It's more about capacity.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more a matter of whether your partner actually believes in the long term, isn't it, rather than the short term, I guess. Whether they're willing to put that investment in now to realise something 5 years downstream or 3 years downstream, which is beyond their normal reporting cycle. Most companies work on an annual reporting cycle, and whether they're, and I guess one way of doing that is just ring fencing it, maybe getting a separate source of funding or whatever, and ring fencing that fund which specifically goes to the partnership.
Okay, let's move the question to the lady 6 rows back.
Thank you very much. Kay Katz, Nottinghamshire County Council. I'm the leader of the Conservative group there, and I also suffer from being a two-tier authority. In my own division, we have ex-MOD land, which has been sold off to a private developer. The sort of fees that are required of that private developer to develop that land are far too high. If you look at 106 agreements and community infrastructure levy, I actually think you're asking developers to put too much money up front, which they have to borrow. And in uncertain times, of course, that can quickly turn the tap off. It would be far better if we could unblock this particular situation, because a road bridge is required to cover the A46, a major trunk road. That money was about £2.5 million and probably rising. Half the estate's already been built. The people living there have been promised much and delivered little, and they're very worried about where they're going to get their community facilities from, like the village hall. It won't happen until the second tranche is built. Second tranche won't be built till the road bridge is built. You see my problem exactly. And of course we have the Borough Council to sort of knock into shape at the same time. Now, on top of that, I actually think private housing is far higher quality these days. The design is much better. The road layouts are much better than anything local authorities do. And I wouldn't like to see us go back to the bad old days of the 1960s and 70s, which put up blocks of very uninteresting houses of poor quality and really not very durable for the future. So I think there's a big job to be done here. Of course, the first job we need to do is get unitary authorities.
I think the answer is yes, but I think that was yesterday's session rather than particularly today's session. I'm not quite sure what the... I think the question was, how do you unblock the problem in order to obtain the benefit of the development at the end of the project, the benefit for the community?
I'll have a first go. Actually, I'm minded to answer a slightly different question, which is that because actually I agree with you about too much local authority housing, particularly in the 60s and 70s, and certainly in urban areas, being of very poor quality, and I agree with that. I suppose the only thing I would say is it doesn't have to be like that, and when you see some of the newer developments coming out now, that isn't the case of them. What I'd also say, and I hinted a bit on this, is that one of the things through a partnership, I think, so local authorities tend to go for wholly owned companies, but actually it doesn't have to be a wholly owned company. It can be one that's either minority owned or even a 50-50 deadlock JV where their partner does the design and the build. And that might suit, in particular, a county who, especially a two-tier county where they've never had housing duties before and don't have direct delivery already in-house. Because I just think that, you know, why build up those skills when they are in existence in the private sector? And of course, the other advantage of those minority or technically non-controlled companies is, of course, that you can get any borrowing that they take out completely off balance sheet because you know it's not a controlled company, and that might be important to you in relation to your prudential borrowing limits, or might just be important to you because you don't want it on balance sheet. So you know that sort of link with the private sector. It doesn't have to be sort of poor quality would be my thought.
Okay. Jonathan, do you want to have a quick bash before we move to the next question, and before I get the opportunity of having a rant about off-balance sheet borrowing, which has got us really well elsewhere, hasn't it?
Yeah. I guess one of the ways around it is just to throw more into the bucket. To be honest, so that there are always going to be cash-hungry elements to any development, and there are going to be more lucrative. So throw more in the bucket and possibly extend the term of the relationship. So the appetite of the private sector is peaked to the point where they look at the whole thing and are able to afford the infrastructure side of it through a longer term relationship. That's generally how we get around it. But
okay, but I assume there's not a great deal more to throw into the bucket. But quickly moving on.
Keith Evans, Deputy Leader of Hampshire County Council. Part of my question has been answered, so I will be very brief. In Hampshire, there are 46,000 planning permissions that have been given that houses haven't been built on, and that's gone up by 10,000 in the last year. So it appears that it's not the supply of land that's the problem, it's the rate at which the houses get built upon them. What do you feel we can do to change that so that housing developers, both in the public and the private sector, are encouraged to build the houses on the planning permission that's been given by local residents, rather than constantly asking for more land and not building on it?
Really simple. Work with house builders and developers who don't land bank. We don't land bank. And you can see it on their balance sheet, to be honest. Look at their balance sheet, find out who land banks and who doesn't, and make sure you have an active developer, to be frank. There are those that land bank heavily, and you can see it in their public accounts.
Anything to add?
No.
No. Okay. Moving on. Yes, sir.
Mike Appleyard from Buckinghamshire. We've been concerned for some time that simply selling the land doesn't give us a long-term return. And we've really got to start thinking, I think, about how we make the land work over the longer term rather than simply selling it off. And what I'm interested in hearing are what are the ideas for making for developing a long-term income from that land, rather than simply selling it off and getting a quick response. And I think I will refrain from commenting in the same way as the Deputy Leader at Hampshire. We don't appear to need the land at this point in time. Surely in the next few years we do. But selling the land now for planning permissions just doesn't seem like a good idea to me.
Yep. Right. Jonathan?
Again, enter into arrangements that are long-term, where you have a golden share. In other words, you have a share, even if it's a 50-50 or a minority share, over tenure and mix. To be frank, look at PRS, look at other ways of generating an income stream. It's quite common now for there an element to be an element of market rental property in any one of these kind of partnership arrangements, as well as property for sale, as well as affordable. As well as non-housing as well, commercial use, which you can derive an income stream from.
Okay.
I'd also say have a good, long, hard look at each of those land holdings and what's right for each one. Because there are times, I think, when a disposal and taking a capital receipt is the right thing to do. There are other times when actually you really want the long-term income stream, and I think it is that it's the reduction in grants, the availability of cheap money, those two things combined with the planning powers and other powers that have led to local authorities setting up delivery companies. But even those that have a housing company delivering homes will still dispose of land for capital receipts. And, you know, absolutely, they will take a decision about that, and that being the best route through. It is all about what's right, I think, on the particular site and for the local authority. Take a big thing for your sector very much is that I notice is the difference in the way in which local authorities will treat agricultural land holdings. Some councils see them as very important to their local economy and providing access to farming on a small scale. Other counties take the view, no, they just want to sort of maximise receipts. So, you know, it is all about reconciling what's right for you in terms of how you deal with those sites and land.
Okay, Martin, let's have another books perspective.
Yeah, a bit embarrassing, two bucks together. But the comments I wanted to make, first of all, in terms of your landholding issue, although we weren't on your chart, one of the things we've been doing is mapping both county-owned land, but also district-owned land for no particular reason, and also looking at NHS holdings. So actually, when you look at county, district, and also the NHS, it's quite interesting where you look at where you can actually achieve some really quite significant asset rationalisation between the various bodies, and also potentially release land for housing development. The other point I wanted to come back to, which Kay over there raised, was this issue of infrastructure, which I'm not sure there was an adequate answer to. Maybe I missed it before I came in, but the big issue locally always is infrastructure. We're building more houses in Buckinghamshire than any of the major metropolitans outside of Leeds. Lots and lots of little boxes going up all around places like Aylesbury. But the congestion in that town is just getting worse and worse and worse. And we just have not got the money for the major infrastructure in terms of a bypass or whatever that people locally are crying out for. And the same is true around most of our major towns. When you look at the value uplift from grass fields to residential housing estates, there is a massive, massive uplift. And yet infrastructure seems to be the end of the food chain when it comes to actually the viability testing for whether or not, you know, very small incremental uplifts in infrastructure can be afforded. How do we actually change the system so we actually get infrastructure thought about up front rather than at the very end of the process?
Right. So who wants to think about infrastructure first? And did I hear, Martin, a plea for a land value tax there? You know, that's...
Whatever the answer is, just tell me.
Okay. So, Jonathan?
It's not the answer, but I'll tell you what I think is happening. So I guess by definition, NI's, the National Infrastructure Commission, for instance, looks at and is there to prioritise infrastructure spend, but it's very much at the high level. And then when we look at development, we absolutely look at infrastructure, but unfortunately, being lazy, we would tend to look at those developments with committed infrastructure already. It is a really, all I will say, it's a really difficult one that I'm not sure anyone in this room is necessarily in the position to solve, because unless infrastructure is there or promised or funded, then it's a big challenge for certainly private sector partners.
Okay.
No, I agree with that, and it is interesting just because I've been doing a little bit of work in Southwark, and it's interesting is how the Bakerloo line extension down to Lewisham has suddenly galvanised the interest of the private sector, because although those stations won't open until 2030, all of that land now has very significant value, and of course those homes probably wouldn't be delivered out for, well, minimum 3 years, more like 5 anyway. And I'm not sure there isn't I mean, government's always found this a difficult subject, regardless of its political colour, it feels, in Britain, to me. And I'm not sure there's any other answer to than the one Jonathan gave about putting more money in the bucket. I mean, one of the things I would say, we have had historically low interest rates. I appreciate that they are, gilts are creeping up slightly, but I mean, even now, borrowing short, so anything under 10 years from the Public Works Loan Board is ludicrously cheap, and has been for 6 years, and even on a sort of 30-year basis is cheap. So it's so cheap that if you can't make a housing scheme stack up now, you probably never will. So, this is the moment, I think, that, if you do have a delivery arm, like a company where you can capture that value, whether it's with a partner or it's wholly owned, where you can capture that value and you can borrow long term, and local authorities can, and much cheaper actually than the private sector. So, Public Works Loan Board is a lot cheaper than development finance for Jonathan and others. That is the role that local government can play.
Okay. I'm thinking, Martin, that local growth fund, shouldn't that be some sort of resource to be able to build? Because there's loads of money around, isn't there, from government through the local growth fund? Or perhaps I've read the wrong script on that one. Oh, surely not. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yes. Peter, please, from Surrey.
I wasn't going to say anything, but can I just follow on Martin's question? Because I think the trouble with infrastructure, we've had years and years of neglect in Surrey, 50 years of neglect in infrastructure. If you're building 10,000 homes all in one go, then the infrastructure is usually much more straightforward. If you build the same number of homes in lots of little bids of 100 here, 50 there, 200 here, in my own town of Godalming, we are now completely choked. We've got hundreds of new homes coming on stream. We've got a 1930s road structure and a rail structure for the 2100s, and it's just not working. In the county of Surrey, we have 2 types of people: those who don't want development under any circumstances, CPRE and guardians of the green belt and the rest, and those who are happy to have development, providing the infrastructure comes. And this is the huge issue for us. And if we don't solve it, we're going to have a very discontented population.
I don't think there's a question there, but I think it was something that we just all agree with. Yeah. But doesn't the infrastructure have to be there before the houses? And that's a big dilemma, I would have thought, Peter.
I have to confess, I'm probably one of the people that makes it much worse. I cycle through Godalming on Saturdays and Sundays. So
you're not a Guardian reader as well, are you?
No, I'm not.
Right. Okay. Final question at the front, please.
Beryl Ezard, Dorset County Council. And I'm also a district councillor, shadow spokesperson for housing in Purbeck. We have got so many restrictions in our area because of AONB, Heathland, and all sorts of other things that we find it very difficult to find land. I see you mentioned about released land from the MOD. We've got MOD land. How do we approach the MOD, and whether there is a prospect of using some of their land, please?
And I found in my dealings with the MOD there was only one way, and it's through proof and evidence. You actually have to almost compare the land holding that you have locally with what they have on a national scale, and actually put a case to them. There are we ended up effectively kind of working at having a ranking system for land sale or joint development. Brian mentioned the footprint strategy earlier. The MOD have been promising for some time a footprint strategy which does just that. It effectively says, right, okay, this is the land we absolutely need, and this is the 30%, which they're saying at the moment, roughly surplus, which they don't need. And they should actually be naming sites and effectively saying, this is where these sites sit in our priority list. I think getting hold of that pretty sharpish, and there's a team at Andover. They're called SAP, Strategic Asset Management Planning Team at Andover, who are responsible for delivering that right now. There is an element of the footprint strategy already on the MOD, on the Defence Infrastructure Organisation's database, so you could well be able to track that down. I'm just a little bit time expired. I haven't been involved for 2 years, but certainly it was a regularly published paper.
Perhaps you can have a conversation with.
Yeah.
Final comment?
Well, only that we've put all the sites that the MOD have announced as surplus on our website, and actually I might, if I just get your card on the way out, because I'm having my people trawl through them. I can't honestly remember if any of them are in your neck of the woods.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, both to Brian and to Jonathan, and can we show our appreciation in the usual way? Thank you very much.